This is the DRF Players Podcast. Here are your hosts, Peter Thomas Fornatel and Jonathan Kinchin.
Hello and welcome to the DRF Players Podcast. This is show 346, the Friday, June 22nd, 2018 edition. I'm your host, Peter Thomas Fornatel, back with you from my childhood home in the North Shore of Long Island, my dad's old office. One of my favorite places to do these broadcasts, at least when the internet connection is stable. We couldn't run into that situation of the mom's basement dodgy Wi-Fi. Hopefully we won't have to deal with that today. I am joined, and we appreciate him getting up very early, very difficult for him with the rock and roll lifestyle that he leads, especially in the wake of so much success. JK, what's up?
I've had this impression that our podcast was like the anti-mom's basement.
Technically, it's my mom's garage I'm sitting in right now.
It looks like just tell me you're not. You didn't join the dark side, did you?
What?
You didn't join the dark side of like the mom's basement, did you?
Oh, no. I'm still not going on Twitter rants about, you name the topic and taking a negative view of everything in the world. I just happen to literally be in my mom's garage. And it's really garage. I should have said garage. I went for the cheap joke and said basement, but it's really, this was like, used to be an actual proper suburban garage. I'm guessing sometime in the 80s. My dad had it converted, and for a long time, I'm actually looking at an old picture of it now on the wall, an article in the New York Times many years ago where my dad was profiled, I think, between radio gigs, and it's not actually that different. If you've seen The Bunker, which you've seen on Out of the Gate many times, with like one full wall of vinyl and the stereo equipment and all that stuff. That's what this used to look like. Nowadays, it's more of like a standard guest room / office. So I sit at the desk over here, and we do the show every time I'm out here. Susan is away at a conference, a publishing conference. So Perrin, with school being over, gets to come out to one of her favorite places in the world, which we call Camp Nana. So Camp Nana is in full effect right now. I think she's eating pancakes while watching a screen and then gets to go to the pool later. So I'm just along for the ride. I will finish up in here and then basically watch World Cup until about 4 o'clock today. I'm enjoying Camp Nana too, frankly.
I never went to camp when I was a kid. I went to I think I went to one like kind of overnight camp, and I was like, it was like one of those rooms full of bunk beds.
Yep.
And for whatever reason, I don't even really remember what it was. I wasn't really feeling it. So my dad came and picked me up in the middle of the night.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I wasn't digging it at all. I don't remember why. I don't remember what it was, but it was just something about it I wasn't feeling. So,
no Wi-Fi?
Yeah, it was probably what it was. They didn't have Wi-Fi. We actually got a great question about that. I can't wait to talk about. I wasn't able to watch the fifth at Mountaineer, so I was out.
Absolute deal breaker. This is our outer, and it's set. My computer is telling me my Wi-Fi is bad. Do I sound okay to you, JK?
So far, so good. No issues.
All right. Well, what was the question you were referring to? Let's start right there. We're doing sort of a special show today. You did promise a listener you were going to give thoughts on a race at Canterbury, so we will get to that. But mostly this is going to be an evergreen show, and I love this idea that you had yesterday. We're just going to talk about some handicapping concepts and have some discussion in that regard. But what was the question regarding Wi-Fi? Start there.
Well, my favorite question that we got was and I'm trying to find it so I can give question credit. Andrew Martino asked, "What is the most random / embarrassing place you've ever watched a race on your phone or computer?"
Oh, that's an amazing one. I didn't even see that. And are we taking your Camp Minnewaska experience into account here, or is you going to go in a different direction?
No, in truth, I didn't even know what a thoroughbred was then. But I've got some good ones. But I'll also tell some stories of like, the person who I think has probably had some of the best ones is like Duke Matisse. But Duke, we watched a race like literally in our seats at the Super Bowl. Duke printed his PPs out that morning. He had his PPs. We were at the Super Bowl, and he was betting at the Super Bowl.
That's tremendous. We was cheering at inappropriate times, like during the timeout and whatnot, or was it blending in with all the first downs?
Yeah, I think we were blending in. So that was a fun one. I can't tell you how many weddings I've watched races during. Quite a bit of those. I watched a race. I watched a race at like 2 a.m. at my brother's show in Ibiza one time. I watched in the DJ booth. Robert and I watched a race from Belmont. I can't.
Ibiza, the Super Bowl. You're earning your reputation. Now be honest with us. Be honest. You don't have to say who. You don't have to say where. But have you ever had a funeral route?
A funeral? No.
I'm pretty sure I have. Not an out loud route, but I'm pretty sure there might have been some taking a little walk at an opportune time during a wake and watching a horse race. I think I might have you beat on that one. Any other crazy ones that come to mind?
Oh man, I mean, I'm trying to think of another good one that I've done.
I like the idea of finding things that are like just whoa. You're going for the jet setting ones, which is great. But I just want something downright inappropriate, like parent-teacher conference, PTA meeting, something like that.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I have a move that I've tried to perfect, which is I'm doing air quotes. I have to go to the bathroom. And then you walk awake with your hand like not over the top, but just kind of hand slightly on your stomach. So it suggests that you're going to be gone longer than you're going to be gone longer, and then you just go for it.
Oh my God, we learned a lot about TV production last week when we were cutting the World Horse Players Tour. We learned about different breaks. You can probably figure out what 10-1 and 10-2 are. We had a lot of discussion about what 10-3 might be. 10-4 definitely skulking off to the bathroom to watch a horse race.
Yeah, no, and that you probably need that too. The one of the things that helped me that helped us to pick our awesome producer Michelle Wilrich was her understanding of I need a break to watch this race. The things that got her over the hump, she understood that, and so it worked out good. We should probably name it at 10-4.
I do remember when you were first doing the show, we won't name any names, but the first producer you worked with on Win Play Show was like not particularly understanding of the fact that, there was actual money being bet and things happening. And I remember you complaining to me like, I'm not sure I can do this. I'm trying to put my pick six in and they want me to just stand around. I'll show up when I need to, but this is ridiculous. And then you started working with Michelle and you're like, oh, this Win Play Show is the greatest.
Well, Michelle was great the whole time. I said, look, Michelle, you tell me where you need me and I'll be there. But I can't, I got to move around. I got to think, whatever. And so she was always really cool about it. She's like, do you need a bet? I was like, no. She's like, and then she's like, if you need a bet, go now. And I'd be like, boom. And I'd go and come back. And so, yeah, I'm trying to think. I've from some places now, but I'm trying to think of one that's really, really bad. I just can't think of it.
I think we gave a decent answer to the question. We can return to it, or perhaps on another show. And if listeners have any of their own great stories, this could be a pretty entertaining Twitter conversation. So
we should have made a hashtag for it. I'll try to think of one before the end of the show, and people can can tweet their embarrassing, regretful moments of watching a race.
We had a bunch of other questions come in. I do want to get to the meat of this show since we're 10 minutes in already. I think we should talk about some evergreen handicapping concepts, and then if there's time at the end, we'll come back to questions. If not, we'll put a pin in these questions. I don't know, and maybe a fuller reckoning next week, because I don't think we'll have a ton to recap, really. We're in this sort of funny time of the year. But the Triple Crown's done. We're not to the summer meets yet. There's still plenty of racing to talk about, obviously, but I think for the show's purposes, this is a good time to sort of check back in with our listeners and answer some questions. Let's start off with the most basic handicapping question, JK, in terms of let's say you're giving advice to somebody starting out who has a question about where to begin, what data to use, what sources of information to pay attention to. We've talked about this before on the show, but just to give like a little bit of a recap, what would you recommend for somebody just starting out?
Yeah, I think especially depending on where you're at in terms of your age, if you're I think a lot of and at least not even the younger generation, but also just the kind of the new world we live in, we're very visual now. Everything's like right in front of us. And one of the things that I've found when showing newer people to the sport is Timeform US, I think really helps them visualize what's happening better with the colors and the codes and things like that. So I think that's really helpful. I like to start with Timeform US because I'm a big believer in kind of like pace makes the race. And there's in the top right corner, there's a pace projector that actually lays out fairly accurately, in my opinion, like what the shape of the race is going to be like. And I've talked about it a million times before. I like to handicap in order of who the pace projector says is going to be on the lead, and the end with the whole pace is going to be out. Whether it's true or not, it helps me visualize the race better from a pace perspective, which I think is the most important. That's why I would recommend someone start with Timeform US, especially because, one of the great things about the daily racing form and why it's the most used PPs out there is because it's how I learned to handicap. So like when all these little habits that I have, my eyes are much more successful at finding them through daily racing form PPs. And so those are kind of my two starting points.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, obviously, given who is our sponsor here essentially on the show, we'd have to, even if it wasn't true, we'd say DRF and Timeform US, but the fact is that it is true. And I think you make a great point about the visual nature of Timeform. And I think it's if I were starting from zero, I would probably look at as the DRF Classic PPs at first, because I think it's a little bit easier to get a handle on things right out of the box with Timeform. As your play develops, especially, I think the real benefit to me of DRF and Formulator, other than this elegant presentation of data, is the opportunity to customize things to your exact specifications in terms of which information you're seeing, but also the ability to make notes. And I think for a lot of novice players looking to take it to the next level, this might be something to think about. People don't even realize you can have your notes on every race through DRF Formulator appear right in the PPs. I can't tell you how many times, JK, we're watching a race and we'll make some observation about something subtle we saw there, either a subtle trip or something about the way the pace went down, or a horse who had a perfect trip and just didn't fit. And if it's down, then when it's just amazing how that experience of taking a little note will make me remember that race vividly. Whereas if I don't write it down, I might forget that it happened at all or dimly remember it. But that ability to take your own subjective view of a race and build it into the PPs that you're using, I mean, to me, that's the kind of thing that can take things to another level. And folks who are starting at the beginning and are still in that stage where the DRF PPs are kind of like hieroglyphics to them, book I always recommend, Brad Free's Handicapping 101. I think that really goes through and breaks down exactly what you're looking at in terms of the past performances. The Maloney book that I worked on, Betting with an Edge, I think that's a great one for explaining a really logical handicapping process of how to evaluate each horse. But honestly, it's probably not a bad idea to start with something, even a little piece of that to, really get a sense of what's what in the PPs. Do you have any advice for people looking to understand what means what in the PPs?
Yeah, look, I don't know where to find it, but you just Google it and find it, or just do a nice dig on the DRF website. But there's a lot of like tutorial things on the DRF website that like walk you through what every little thing is on the PPs. Like, if you're a professional, there's a chance that there's something on the PPs that you're not 100% sure what it is, and there's a way to find that there. So I'd always recommend that. I've sent that to a few people. Like I said, I don't know exactly the link, but it's on there somewhere. And the other thing,
we should do a series, whether it was webinars or just in the it might be a bad idea to do a podcast like basic educational series, nothing too in the weeds, just like couple of minute videos of this stuff. I think there'd be an audience for it. Is that a good use of our time, you think?
Yeah, no, I think there definitely is. Like, and the other thing I was going to suggest as well is that's how I learned Timeform. I'll never forget where I was when I started watching Timeform US.
Do tell.
I don't remember which Derby it was. It was Derby week. I was probably 2000, I don't know, 9, 10, 11, 9, 8, whatever. And I was like sitting in this library at University of Texas, like hanging out, didn't have an office. We didn't have an office in Austin yet, just finding somewhere with Wi-Fi. And I watched like every Timeform US video, like tutorial that walks you through everything. And I thought it was cool. I was looking for new stuff, and I still try to look for new stuff. And I recommend that everyone else look for new stuff. If you're just using one thing to handicap, you're probably wrong. You should use more than one. It's great to use them as checks off of one another.
Yeah, for me, the big thing with that is a little bit, it depends on what kind of brain you have. You, JK, are one of the great multitaskers that I've seen. You can hold all this stuff in your head at once and find a way to elegantly process it. Some people, I think, frankly, I need a bit more of a streamlined, dumbed down approach. But I still agree with what you're saying. If you can look at things, if you can look at multiple sources of information, for me, I kind of need to do it sequentially to sort of look at one and then another and then another. You'll gravitate towards certain processes and pieces of information, and you can build a workflow that works well for you. Going too deep into it, what is your workflow like? You mentioned you start with Timeform, and you're sort of and that idea is so powerful. The professional player Sean Borman, I think, now does that because of you, starting with the horse projected to be on the lead and going all the way back through the field. That's a powerful idea. Where do you go from there in your process and your workflow?
Yeah, so what I'll normally do, I'm going to make this as concise as I possibly can, because sometimes it can be longer, but I'll open up the DRF PPs, classic PPs or formulator, just depending on where I'm at, and, because it can be kind of slow and annoying sometimes, to be honest. So I just depends on, if I'm on an airplane, I can't handle it. So I'll open up Timeform US, I'll open up the DRF PPs, and then I will, for instance, excuse me, I'm looking at the Mystic Lake Derby. I have it up right now. It suggests you're on the lead. So I would click on Mr. Jägermeister on the 3-year-old situation. I would look at the last race, and then I would just start to look down to see what's happening, what happened with this horse in the past. Like, did this horse run on the turf yet? Nope, never. Okay, first-time turf. So I understand the 5, first-time turf. And then I'll look. The 14 is next on the pace projector. I'll go over to the 14. Primo touch. and I'll look. Okay, he ran a 98 last time, showing speed and faded. He's drawn outside. Then I'll go to the 8. He ran a 103 on the synth last time, was forwardly placed. Okay, and I go through all of them quickly because I think what happens is when you fully handicap a horse in a race that you don't know who else is in the race, I feel like you're missing things that you need to not miss when you're taking the full approach. So I like to take a quick overview in like 10 to 15 seconds of every horse, and then I start back over and do the deep dive.
Because what you don't want to have happen is to get wedded to the good-looking horse who's in second, when meanwhile there's a horse who's projected to be in 7th, who actually, by your reckoning, is going to probably be closer than that and is a better finisher anyway. You don't want to become prejudiced to the horses you look at first, essentially, right? I mean, that's part of what you're talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. It'll happen, too. And especially the way that I handicap, where I start at the front and I work my way back, and I like horses on the front end more anyways. It's very simple for me to find the speed horse that to fall in love with, when in reality there's 7 other speed horses in there. There's 2 stretch outs that are stretching from 5 furlong turf sprints to a mile, in a 16th, and they're drawn outside with Kendrick Carmouche and Paco Lopez. You know what I mean? Like, there's all of these things that can happen better store. I think you're better off if you just kind of quickly, I call it quick capping. Just look, we've all done it before too, right? You got 13 minutes to post. You forgot about the pick 5. You handicap the whole pick 5 in 13 minutes. Whatever it is that you do to do that, start your process with that, and then bring it back and slowly go back over it again. That it's worked for me in terms of really being able to have a better view of the race before I start deep diving, so that I can catch those little things that are important based on the narrative of the race that day.
How often do you find a horse when you're quick capping that ends up being your selection, and how often does doing the deep dive change your initial conclusion?
Yeah, we talked about it the other day. I don't remember where we were. We were together. And I said, if I would have capped like that, quick cap a little bit more, because you don't really need to know where your love is. You just kind of need to know, like, it doesn't really matter. I'm going to use this horse. I'm going to use this horse that appears to be loose on the lead, that da-da-da-da-da-da. Like, it doesn't matter who else is in there. I'm going to use that 9-to-1 shot.
Right.
So
if it's going to be a price, and if for a price, sometimes you don't need more than the quick cap angle if the quick cap leads you to a price. That's what you're saying. Exactly.
You just move on. So, but I was telling you, it was at Gulfstream. I don't know if you remember this. I don't know where we were. It was a one horse for Todd Pletcher that was stretching out. Was a horse that I landed on. It was like 7-2. I would not have used that horse in the quick cap. There was another horse, had a big time form US thing, nice pace figures, was going to be forward, and because I came back in for the deep dive, I had found that the going long at Saratoga. So, when a Todd horse is bet to do something, they typically can do it, or someone thought they could do it. So I knew the horse would stretch because they started the horse long. They brought the horse back in a sprint that the figure wasn't as high as you would have liked for it to be, but the 2-year-old figure still made sense to project. I wouldn't have got to that if I didn't come back in again for a deeper look. So it happens sometimes. It happens when you come back for the deeper look that you can find something, but it happens where, like, my first instinct is the one that I use no matter if I look at the race for 12 hours or if I looked at it for 4 minutes.
It just all depends. What I remember about that particular Pletcher horse is that horse, and I wish I could remember the name, but was just running against much better. And I think in this day and age, we're so attuned towards pace and figures that sometimes, and so pace and figures, that sometimes the sort of old school, the kind of stuff that, Andy Beyer made his money betting against in the 1970s, those horses today sometimes offer a whiff of value, the way they have these subtle, like, class angles and things. But you and I both, it takes us a minute to see them. as opposed to the speed, the figures, and the pace, which it just sort of jumps off the page in 2018.
Yeah, the Piper and I, the Piper, the gate at the gates of dawn, the Sultan of Schenectady. We got into it one time at the Prince of Keelan's house about this topic, and although you're kind of pointing out that class helped me find that horse, I'm a believer that speed figures are class. That like if you run a 90 speed figure, I don't. It depends on circumstances, trip and pace, then you ran a 90, and like that's what class you're in. I don't care if you ran against 12 claimers or if you ran in a listed stake. Now, let me explain what I mean by that. But it depends on how it was earned. If you ran a 90 because you got to sit off of like some cheap speed in a 12 claimer, then that is a part of the narrative that I want to understand. But it doesn't change the fact that you stop the clock, and with a 90 figure. But if you had to duel Triniberg on the front end of a 2-turn race, then and you earned a 90, then I'm a little bit more impressed by that. But to me, figures are class.
Yeah, I agree and I disagree. I mean, I think that Pletcher horse being a perfect example of where it still matters, because the horse in question, if I'm remembering right, had done his task in quite a while. So therefore, the recent figures weren't reflective of the horse's class, and you had to sort of intuitively know, wait a second, based on the fact that this horse has never been in for a tag against a lot of horses who had, and there were all these reasons to believe that the recent figures just weren't indicative of it. All other things being equal, if horses have been running in comparable situations, yeah, I do believe very often, as long as it was earned in a fair way, that claimer stepping up to an allowance or a stake, if I believe he's going to run that figure, I'm going to evaluate him as that figure and use that. So in that sense, I agree with you. But I think there are some subtle times in the game in 2018 we're trying to take like a little bit of a broader view. And the other thing about class is it's not just speed, it's the combination of pace and speed. Because those stakes horses are going to go a lot faster. Well, I mean, it depends. This is an overgeneralization. But very often those stakes horses are going to be going faster early, thus making it harder for the speed horse anyway to earn that figure late. Would you agree? Would you agree with that? That at least give me that it's a combination of some pace and final when you're trying to evaluate class.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I mean, that's why I believe that it's circumstantial, right? Like I believe that pace and trip definitely influence how a figure is earned, and therefore there needs to be a story there. Like if really all it is like if you grew up in a poor family, your mom and your dad and you paid your way through college and you become a CEO at a business, you still at the end of the day are a CEO. The same thing can be said if you were just like some rich kid who got handed the CEO position, right? But the guy who earned it, I give him a little bit more credit. But at the end of the day, they're both CEOs at a firm, right? So it doesn't. To me, it's how it was earned is part of the story. So what I would say is that CEO, if he gets a rough road if he has a rough road of adversity, if his business is struggling, if like that's the guy I want in that situation because he's more battle tested based on the scenarios in which he earned his position. It's the same way I look at horses. It's like it's not that I don't. I want to know if a guy got a 90, if a horse got a 90 figure, I just want to know how he got it. So I of him earning it again today based on the adversity he overcame to earn it in the previous situation, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm following you there. Class for me in the modern age, it takes on more subtle dimensions than the sort. I'd still probably call it a fundamental handicapping factor, but it's like probably the fourth of the four behind speed, class, and what you might call form for me. And it takes on subtle things, and some of it has to do with the difference at the highest levels. I still believe that grade ones are significantly harder to win in racing than, and there are exceptions. We've seen some pretty soft grade ones the last few years, but the real grade ones, the grade 1+ races, you might call them, big difference between a grade 2 and a grade 3. That's an area where I look at class and I try to really look at a horse. Just some horses you feel like are going to be able to compete at that level or have successfully competed at that level. And the other thing comes down to character. And I think we much too often overrate this in horses. Horses, I think it's very tempting to call a lot of horses chandeliers or hangers or whatever you want to call them, when a lot of the time I think they're just not as good finishers as other horses. And it's just, they're not, I don't think they're always as fundamentally flawed as we make it out to be. And we see it all the time when horses we think or have a little bit of hang in them end up going on and winning, plenty of stakes races and grade 1 races. But there's no doubt that there are some horses who have a bit of a character flaw. I don't know. Did you watch the Gold Cup yesterday from Ascot, JK?
I did. Yeah. How
Vizirabad is a horse who does not want to win. He gets to the front and he stops. Career. It's not to say that he can't win. He certainly has won his fair share of races when against the right competition or when produced at exactly the right time. But you put that horse in a fight with another Group 1 horse, good luck getting him to the line first, because he doesn't want to be there. And to me, that's sort of like a subtle class angle. I want the Stradivarius, I want the Order of St. George on his ground more than I want the Vizirabads of the world. Is that a class angle, and does that make sense to you?
I don't know. Yeah, I just think that class is everything. It's a class angle, but it's also he's not that good angle, right?
He is so talented, though. There's just some mental. He puts himself right there. He ran so well in that race. He probably had nearly won. He gets right to the head, and then it's like, okay, I've done enough.
But see, that's the thing is Cam Newton is the most talented quarterback in the NFL, but to me, he's just not that good. And it's because he gets in his own way from in my opinion, from a mental standpoint. I think he's a front-running mental midget.
Cam Newton has crossed JK off the Christmas card list.
No, I don't. I think that he's one of the most annoying players for me to watch when things are going well.
Midget, that's harsh.
When things are, that was an old coaching coaching thing we used to say. No, he's one of those guys. It's the same idea as you're talking about with Vizirabad. When Cam is winning, he's like a great team guy. He's smiling, he's ear to ear, he's high-fiving, he's dancing, he's carrying on. When he's losing, he's got the towel over his head. He wants everyone to know how frustrated he is with his performance, how frustrated with his performance. He's just like this front-running horse that when he hits the front,
he's sort of the opposite of Vizirabad. He needs to be in front. Vizirabad just wants to be in the group.
Right. Just no. Anytime there's adversity, that good player, that talented player, starts to kind of fall apart. And that's just the way I feel about how he performs. And so Des Bryant is a little bit the same way. How talented is that freaky athlete? And when things are going good, he's high-fiving and carrying on and celebrating and first downing and all this stuff. And then he starts dropping balls and he starts going palms up and his body language changes and he starts yelling at his coaches and sitting by himself on the bench. That's to me, that's not class. It's just it's an overview of them as a player. They're just not that good because they have things that keep them from being that good. I think it's the same way with horses. I don't care. To me, I don't understand the idea of, I ran 4th in a grade 1, And so now all of a sudden I run at a grade 3, like I have a class edge on me.
Yeah, I think that's real.
Yeah, I don't think it is. I think that it's circumstantial to how that horse runs in that grade 1.
I agree with that. Like there's a good fourth and there's the clunky fourth you can have, but the horse that like battled and just got beat by horses who are the better horses is going to probably have an edge.
But in the rawest moment for me, to my original point, is that the reason if it's earned in a way where there was adversity overcome, you earned a 90 figure because the winner earned a 101, and the winner is a grade 1 horse because he runs 101 figures. So to me, it always comes back to the figure, and that's how. So
I get that. I don't think we're too different on this issue. Just to loop it back to my point about class, though, I think there's a lot of horses that we assume that seem to exhibit those kind of character flaw. It's very rare. I think whether you're talking about human athletes or horses, that those character flaws are real. I think a lot of times it comes down to just a fundamental quality. I mean, how often do we see the one I'm making up an easy example, but I think this is right. The horse who's, looks like a hanger in maiden special weights drop down to a lower level. People, I hear a lot of times, oh, you got to try to beat this horse. He's only, he's 0 for 12 or he's 1 for 12. The horse will drop to his level and he'll just run to his numbers. And if his numbers are good enough, he'll win. His numbers don't get worse because he's against worse competition, which I guess is another version of what you're saying. Do you agree with that idea?
Yeah, no, of course. And that's why I think it's important to tell the story from the bottom of the PPs up. And if you do that and you walk your way through it, you can find those moments of, oh, this one just kind of ran down to his competition. In fact, I actually heard it the other day relating it to sports that are happening now. I heard the other day before the World Cup game of when Mexico played Germany, a guy said they play with such passion, they play up to their competition, but then they lose to teams they shouldn't lose to. So it's going to be interesting to see on Saturday how Mexico. That's who I'm rooting for. Because of because of the proximity and
no, I'm
that nation and those people and so I'm rooting for them. So I'm obviously interested. I want to see how they play against Korea. Are they going to play as well as they did against Germany? Because that game could have been 3-0. They were dominant the entire time.
Absolutely.
And I want to know if they're going to dominate Korea or if they're going to kind of play down, which is to your point of horses doing the same thing. They run in a poor race. They somehow find a way to get a slower figure. Imperial Hint being one of those horses. Remember, Imperial Hint had that really slow race at Tampa that was like a paid workout. Obviously, let's toss the Derby situation in the slop. Then he comes back and he wins the True North when he's running against better.
So much going on there with that horse, I think, in terms of fitness. It's easy. I guess one thing that I'll say in handicapping in general, a point I'll make, saying about looking for narratives, but when you have the choice between a narrative and what your eyes and the numbers tell you, you always, to me, in handicapping, want to go with the latter. I think it's very easy to get swept up in stories when we've got plenty of hard data in this game, and the more you play, especially, the more you'll be able to trust your eyes. And when you make observations, I mean, this came up at Ascot with Cracksman, who, when Cracksman hit the line at Epsom, Rob Dove, one of the top 10 pro punters in the UK today, and I were chatting online, and we both had the same reaction of like, well, I think he's bored. He's not the same horse. The real Cracksman wouldn't have done that, all this stuff. And then two things happened. One, the field he faced in the Prince of Wales was a pretty weak field that in theory, was better than. But then you hear the story. Oh, he hit his head on the gate in the in the Epsom race, and therefore, he was dazed the first half of the race, and that's why he ran that way. And then you see what he does in the Prince of Wales, and I think he's pretty much, he's not the same horse. Frankie's like practically flicking the whip before they even go in the gate. He must have felt asleep under him, and runs a clunker. And there was a 3-5 shot I should have been in full opposition to, and missed the trick by not, actually worse than missed the trick. I actually ended up backing him a little bit, which is not my proudest moment of the week. But I guess the larger point is when you have an opportunity to rely on your own observations, especially your own observations with the idea of have it on the page. Better to do that than to especially listening. It's one thing when you sort of are looking at the PPs and coming up with your own narrative of what might have happened with a horse, but your ears can be your absolute worst enemy in this game. And you are better than anyone I know at being able to synthesize that info and not having it hurt you. But I would say basically every other horse player I've ever talked to honestly about it would almost, they might want to hear the information just to know it's out there, but acting on information that you hear, I mean, I feel like it's been a big net loser for me in my life. Where do you stand on that idea?
Yeah, it's tough, man. Like I'm a big believer in give me all the information you can, and then I'll make my decision. I want to know. Yesterday the Prince of Keeneland called and he liked a horse named Stirred, a Michael McCarthy trained horse. I was run yesterday. And, he's got a good relationship with Mike, and he called Mike to kind of talk about the horse because he wanted to kind of play the horse in some way. And they started talking about the race, and Mike was like, "Look, I heard the Mandela can run. I think that this one can run. That one can run. I'm good. I just, in these baby races, you just never know. Or these, I don't know who's going to be better at whatever." Well, Mike won and paid $13, and so it's one of those situations where I want to. I mean, yeah, like I want to know that though. I want to know that Mike thinks his horse is good, but I also want to know that there's a bunch of other horses in there that are supposed to be good too.
That's a trick where I think sometimes that workout stuff can really help. Not just the workout report, but the idea of, okay, this horse has been working consistently and evenly with this horse who has ran. The horse who's ran runs an 82, and 82 is good enough to win this race. Bring it back to Duke Matisse, who was the first person I really heard talking about doing that kind of analysis. I'd much rather use, I don't consider the Clocker Report soft info. I consider that like hard data that I will bet off of. It's a little tricky these days because it's so factored into the market. I don't know how much edge you get from that alone. But then I think that extra wrinkle of looking at the figures, something you can do pretty easily with Formulator, and the ability, any trainer in America who has a horse in, you can look at the figures their horses have run, their PPs of the horses who they've run in the last 5 years. By putting those two things together, I feel like you can get a bit of a more relevant data point. Yeah, when you just talk to people, so-and-so likes their horse, it's like, to me, that's like less than useless information because, I mean, basically, more than half the people are going to like their horses, and generally speaking, I'd much rather know when they don't like their horse than when they do. It's just too soft.
Don't like is much better than like. I've come to that conclusion. We can
buy that too. Thank you, Prince of Keeneland.
Yes. Cordero, famously Cordero, unbelievable.
Take the horse off the ticket.
Yeah, exactly.
He bought us a nice dinner that night, though. It's all
this. I've been craving that paella, by the way. I'm already ready for it.
Boca in Saratoga. We'll be back. We can go back there for one night during the festival of JK.
I went there back-to-back nights, and which I'm sure probably makes you cringe a little bit. But I went there back-to-back nights.
Hey, listen, that's my ultimate compliment to a restaurant. I have not done it. I might have only done it 3 times in my life, but I recently did it in with that place in Lexington, Middle Fork. I went consecutive nights. I liked it so much. It's something that it's something to do when you find a place that
Not to sidetrack, but I told a story about you yesterday just to a group of people. It was Robert and somebody else. I was talking about that one day we were going to find lunch and we were just going to try to grab something quick. and Michelle had recommended a kind of a chain place.
Oh God,
more of a bar than a restaurant called.
Which is not necessarily a problem. Don't bury the poor place by saying its name.
Oh, okay. So anyways, we walk over to it, and I scooted over to it, but that's not that important. we get over to the place, and the look on Pete's face was priceless. He was like, "I'm not eating here. He said, "I'm not wasting a meal. I'm not eating here." He absolutely refused to go in there. I mean, I just would have went in there and got fajitas or something. And
it was
like,
loud. It was loud. It was obnoxious. The food not good. And especially in a great eating city like LA, specifically Santa Monica, that has all these, from little burger joints to fine dining places I've been told to go. I'm not going to spend a meal at some place that you could get literally anywhere in America level mediocre. That's just how I roll, man. It's different, I guess, if I'm at home and you're with people and it's whatever. But if I'm traveling, especially in a place like LA, I'm not wasting a meal, man. No way. Give me a hot dog off the street rather than that. You know what I mean? At least you can just spend $4 and be done with it and get back in the editing bay quick.
Now, I do have a question. We'll move on. I see these carts all over New York City. These all kinds of hot dogs and
street meat.
Yeah. Do you participate?
I don't. I would a kid. I would have gotten hot dogs from them and stuff. But yeah, I don't typically. That's not exactly true. There are some places near the DRF offices in New York that are more like they're carts, but they're more like food trucks. They're doing some better level stuff. I'll tell you what, carts in LA and food trucks in LA are I've had much better luck. I just feel like the city center ones in New York typically are pretty. I mean, it is what it is. If you feel like a hot dog, you get a fine hot dog. But the halal carts and stuff, it's not my usual go-to. But there are some that are okay.
I dig it.
However, the trucks in LA, I can't emphasize enough. As good as the place we ended up that day, I rejected the first restaurant that had pretty solid tacos. As good as those were, I've had better for much cheaper in the trucks in LA.
Yeah, we have a nice truck community as well in Austin.
It's a good way to recap that one race too that you promised. One of the things I heard you mention when we were talking about pace is the idea of stretch outs, JK. How do you use stretch outs in your handicapping? And in your view, does the time form pace projector account enough for those stretch out horses? Does it put them into the race as much as you tend to think that horses end up there?
Yes, most of the time it does. It takes that into account. The formula that they've put into effect to create the pace projector takes into account that it's a horse stretching out. One of my favorite things I look for is when you're looking at a horse that's stretching from 6 to 7, I want to look for what I've heard Paul and Duke and those guys call an upline, where if you look at a pace figure like Time Form US, and I actually have it on a horse that's running in the Mystic Lake Derby.
Mystic Lake Derby, then.
Well, it doesn't really fold into the discussion of it. It just happens to be a horse in there that has a running line that I can talk about.
Okay.
If you look at the 6 in race 5, the 6 Captivating Moon. If you look at the race as a 2-year-old, the 7 furlong stake as a 2-year-old that was on October 29th. Okay, October 29th at Churchill. You'll notice I don't know how your settings are on your time form. I have it on this horse official times and pace figures. Those are my preferences. If you click on the running line, where the 6th beaten 3.5 lengths, 4th beaten 2 lengths, you click on that, you can change the settings. I have it on pace figures, this horse official times. What I want to see there is a figure that is going up at every point. So 71, 87, 91, 94. That's kind of that's that kind of uplining thing that I'm looking for. Pattern make best. This horse will stretch out, will continue to run longer because he was running the later part of the race faster than the earlier part of the race. Conversely, you'll see some horses where it goes the other way. 104, 102, 98, 88, 77. That's more of a downline situation where it's going the other way. So, and I'll use that on time form. I'll also look for like an even run. And you can find an even run without even having pace figures. If you're looking at a horse that's running 6 furlongs, 7 furlongs, and is like 5th, 4th, 3rd, 4th, 4th, like that's kind of like that even run that I feel like when they stretch out, they don't have to run as fast early. If they have some good breeding, good trainer, good rider, they're tactical. That's the kind of position they could sit second or third in a 2-turn race and stretch out just fine. So those are the kind of the 2 tricks that I look at when it comes to stretching out. Sometimes I'll try to dig into the breeding portion of it. I feel like, you know, a 6 furlong horse can get a 1-turn mile, or a 2-turn mile, depending on where it is, if the horse is left alone on the lead. So it all depends when it comes to that. I prefer looking more at what they've done.
Is it correct? Is it correct, Jonathan, that when you describe that horse that's running faster and slowing down, stands to reason that would be one you'd be looking for on the cutback, going shorter in distance as opposed to stretching out, going longer in distance? Yes.
Absolutely, but it's also there's a small little part that if a horse that kind of downlining type where it's, you know, the time form figure is 120, 112, 111, 110, 94. If that happens, that's not a definite like toss. It's just a clue because, you know, it's not if the whole time form U.S. pace figures, then the horse would run in the Grade 1 Breeders' Cup Sprint, right? Like, so you can't really knock that situation. It still shows talent there, and the horse still could be loose and could still be good enough to handle that field. But I at least consider that when I'm looking at it.
I think jockey comes into play there too, right? Like, let's say a horse who's running too fast early, coded red, pace figures early, and tiring. But when they're doing that, they're in the hands of more of a sending type rider. You see that horse come back. Maybe you see the trainer has put extra work into the horse since or been working the horse longer. You look for some clues and then maybe a switch to a rider who's more known for sitting. That horse, to me, is likely to run more. If what I'm interested in isn't necessarily a cutback so much as, hey, here's a horse who maybe has some hidden ability that the public might not get right away. And especially if it's in a trainer whose hands you trust, I'm just going to say, hey, here's a horse with extra ability. Let's give a little bit of extra credit wherever he shows up, all the more so if there's a clue from a jockey switch or the way the trainers handle the horse that something better could be in the offing.
No, I completely agree, and that's one of the things you have to try to figure out when you're looking at it. And it is okay. There was a lot of all of it to me is energy, disbursement, right? Like how much energy was used in that early part of the race. What if that was better? If that was rationed a little bit better? What could happen here? Sometimes you could find your way to something.
We talk so much about time form US, and we could say time flags up the hidden ability close to the pace in the races coded red, indicating a hot pace. And then conversely, and I think especially in turf races, those horses closing well into fractions coded blue. Very often, those horses just need a little bit more of a pace to run at, or maybe even just be put in the race a little bit earlier, and they can often outrun whatever the bear figure is. We had a couple other topics we wanted to talk about, and we are running out of time. Good concept by you for a show, JK, because we've got so much to chew on. I think we're going to put the discussion of maiden races aside for another day, but here's something important. You and I both throughout the show have been talking sort of generically about pace and not really talking about pace in dirt races versus turf races. Do you do that same technique in turf races of evaluating the field from front to back? And how does pace differ for you when you're evaluating it in terms?
Yeah, I think in turf races you want to. It's tough. I used to think that if you can find a horse that's going to be loose on the lead, that horse has a really live chance. But I need an aggressive rider as well, and I need there to be a little bit of a quality edge to that front running type. And when I mean quality in turf racing, I mean that ability to quicken and really have a nice turn of foot, not a one pace type. Because what often happens, which I think it drives people nuts, including Duke Matisse, when it comes to turf racing, and especially in a place like Saratoga, is like guys will get on the front end and walk on the front end in one race at 20-1 and win, and you're agitated that there was pace, and there'll be a paceless race. A guy will walk on the front end, and some horse comes from last and beats him anyways. To me, the difference in that is how the front runner was ridden, the quality of the front runner, and the ability of all the horses in the field to quicken if you invite them into the race. The jockey's dilemma, which we talk about all the time, I think is more prevalent in turf racing when it comes to the pace scenario. And that's why I think those races are so hard to decipher. It's why I chose, when I played in the NHC this year, to not play any turf racing in my mandatories. In my optionals. It's harder to predict.
In a nutshell, for new listeners, because I know we have a bunch of new listeners since the Triple Crown season, what it comes down to is people think it's as simple as you go slow, it's an advantage for the front runner. You go too fast, it's an advantage for the exactly. To me, and I think what Jonathan's getting at, and what we always talk about with the jockey's dilemma, is you want that horse on the front end. And this is true of both formats, I think, dirt and turf. But I think in a way, especially in turf, you need them to run efficiently. And you need them to be able to use that speed as enough of an advantage where the closers have a lot of work to do coming for home. When you go too slow on the front end, unless you're a horse whose weapon is his closing ability, but if you're a horse whose weapon is more tilted towards speed and you go too slow on the front end, everybody still has a chance turning for home. Whereas I think a lot of those 20-1 shot winners you see, they're running efficiently and getting those other horses on the stretch. Obviously, there's a limit to this. If you go too fast, you will gas out and empty out all over the stretch, and you will not win. Another factor I think that's important when talking about pace and turf races is the there are certain courses, and I think we've see this a lot of Saratogas when it doesn't rain for a week or two in upstate New York in the summer. The speed will definitely be carried more. I want to say especially on the inner, but I'm not even sure if that's right. I think it can be, some years that's right. Some years it can be on both courses, and that's going to set up some turf racing that doesn't resemble turf racing you might see at Keeneland in the spring, or Churchill or Belmont in the fall, or wherever. You do have to, and there's a whole other conversation about bias and what that means, but sometimes that can really tilt the wheel one way or the other. We're almost out of time, JK. Do you have a fine? You want to button up that conversation and then move to this Mystic Lake Derby real quick?
There's a couple of phases they're trying to understand this concept is.
Are they obscene?
No, I don't think. Well, it depends. No, one of them is speed is your weapon. Use it. That's one. That's the weapon that you have as a front runner. So use your speed. The other one is you do not want to invite closers into the race, which happens so often. I say it all the time. Oh, geez, he's inviting the closers into the race. You want to find that sweet spot, and so those are the two concepts when I'm trying to identify a speed situation on turf.
Do you and you think it's similar in dirt? It exists, but to a lesser degree. How would you describe that?
Yeah, I think it's similar. I think it can happen in dirt. If we're going a mile and I get a front runner going 49 on the turf or 49 on the dirt, I'd prefer that scenario over the scenario, the turf one, because to me it's not a foregone conclusion in the turf race.
I think that makes sense. So much to chew on there. Hopefully folks enjoyed this free-flowing conversation. Before we get out of here, who wins this race at Canterbury?
Does the Queen never wear purple? I mean, those are her colors. I don't know. I'm just joking. I didn't bet that.
I wasn't watching. There's Ascot hasn't started yet.
Well, the royal procession is happening.
Oh, I see. Did you bet on the color of the Queen's hat? Is that what you're saying?
No, I would, but I didn't. But I
think purple. I think that's like too over the top. You know, purple is associated with royalty. I think if she wears purple, it's just like too on the nose. It's like, you know, you go to you don't necessarily want to go to the Bruce Springsteen concert with the Bruce Springsteen shirt on. You know, you might want to bust out the Bob Dylan shirt. I know I'm confusing you.
Oh, you are. Yeah.
I think
for the Queen with real names like. Yeah, here you go. So I do have a pet peeve. We always talk about our pet peeves, like in racing and racing etiquette. I do not like the adult that goes to a sporting event and wears a jersey of a team that is not participating. Drives me insane. Like, you know, the guy that goes to the Dodgers game, the Dodgers and the Giants game, but wears his Yankees jersey. Like, come on, dude. Like that. First of all, you're an adult. You probably shouldn't have a jersey on in the first place.
Oh, adults, stop. That's fun to wear.
Jerseys are for kids. kids and rappers in the 90s. That's what it's for.
I was gonna say, you're gonna be ostracized from the hip hop community with this talk.
All right, the Mystic Lake Derby. There's two horses in here that I like. One's a little bit shorter. There's no way you're getting 7-2 on Captivating Moon. You look at his running lines. He's ran against today.
Yeah,
GIDU, who's running it at Ascot. Analyze it, Murad. I like the horse based on the race in the Transylvania 2-back. We talked about the outside being poor at Keeneland that day. That whole meet. He was out there running out, Analyze it late. He's got yielding ground the last two times. I think he's going to like it a little bit firmer. Should get pace to run out. The 5, Mr. Jägermeister, stretching out. Should show speed. The 12, the 13, and the 14 drawn way outside have all shown a little bit of early speed. You figure they're going to show some to try to get better position than the 12, 13, and 14 hole would suggest. Could set it up for Captivating Moon. I'm also going to use the 10 Sniper Kitten. Same angle with the Keeneland turf course. Mike Maker, Tyler Gaffleone was closing into a slow pace, full of run. I think Sniper Kitten for the Ramses could be a little bit dangerous as well. Those will be the two that I'll focus my play on.
Stuff. I can't believe you gave Murad a call. I thought we weren't going to talk about him and Arklow after that YouTube video, but you know, if you insist, JK. Closing thought for this Friday edition of the podcast.
I'm just going to ask you a question. Who can I bet on an Ascot? I'm going to make one Ascot bet this morning while I'm doing laundry. Who can I make some money on?
Nobody. This won't. Well, hopefully the horse will win, and I'll just look smart. But I was going to bet Speak in Colors. I was going to bet Speak in Colors today in the. I think it's the third race at a very, very big price each way. Had a good dove angle from the last race on a day where there was a headwind and had no cover. And he thought had a chance to run better and back to anti-post. So chance to turn over Sioux Nation and upset the apple cart. Sioux Nation, another obvious running there, but we can a long shot and see what we can get done.
Any American? Who's our American route today? Do we have one?
Yeah, doesn't Wesley have one in the first race? The problem is this show isn't even posting till 11, so this will all be over by then. So it's utterly useless for the listeners. But the war.
I'm concerned about myself, Pete, not the listeners.
We can talk about this after the show. The ward that's running in the first race, and of course I'm spacing on the name, looked interesting to me and was a big price in England. Sounded like maybe his, it didn't seem like there was that much separating his top ones. It's hard to read his interviews because he's so positive about everybody. But yeah, it's not impossible that he'll get his second winner. There. But the horse is going to be. It's more a question of a price play. You could go for each way and see what you could do. We should look.
I just wanted to give you a chance to look smart.
Well, there you go.
By redboarding. Oh, Stillwater Cove.
Stillwater Cove, exactly. We could have cheated and come back in here since it's not posting till 11. We could have done it that way, but then
came back in here.
Here. All right, that's it. We're done. We're over time. We will be talking next week, JK. Thank you for getting up early. Thanks to producer Craig for the same, Willie Nile and Travis Stone. Most of all of you for listening. Sorry, we didn't really touch the questions. We went on such a handicapping rabbit hole, but we'll be back with those on Tuesday. I'm Peter Thomas Fornatel. May you win all your photos.